Hey everybody, welcome to the Exit Podcast. This is Dr. Bennett, joined here by Drew Gorham, my friend and co-founder of the Natal Conference, along with our mutual friend, David Moore. Wanted to get together to talk about what we've learned over the last year, what's changed in the space as we roll into NatalCon 2025, which will be March 28th and 29th here in Austin. Good to see you, Drew.
Hey, great to be here, Kevin. So much has happened. Holy cannoli.
Yeah, it's been a wild year. So let's start with your take. What have you seen? What's new?
Well, I've just had my Google alert set up for natalism, and the degree to which it's entered the popular discourse and consciousness is crazy. And I'm not saying we should claim credit for that, but clearly we were riding a trend. You had CNN, the New Yorker, New York Times talking about natalism, talking about demographic decline as a global phenomena. That no one was talking about this in 2023 outside of maybe Elon Musk, who happened to retweet your conference talk from natalism.
Yeah. Definitely the trend line is up and to the right. I think actually just a couple of weeks ago, natalism overtook anti-natalism on Google Trends, so that was exciting. Yeah, and it's hard to even remember how fast things have changed over the last year, the last 4 years. The narrative, like when I was trying to get people to come and when I was seeing like sort of the media coverage of what we were doing and all that, it was very much like, this is a dangerous far right conspiracy theory. Like you should be sort of leery of anybody who's vocally concerned about this, and like no engagement with the object level of like, are we going to be able to sustain, our economy or our society in the face of these challenges? No engagement with it. Just, this is a creepy, weird, like pale, stale male thing to worry about. You saw that a little bit with JD, our boy JD, your friend and mine.
Yes.
JD Vance, who's now the vice president-elect of the United States. That's a joke, by the way. But it is funny. It is funny that JD like follows like half of my mutuals and like people who, many of whom were involved with Tucker Carlson's The End of Men documentary, many of whom are sort of on this beat. And then of course you've got Elon, who's now Trump's major domo, his right-hand man, which is wild. And of course he's deeply concerned about this issue. So it's a pretty cool time for this issue, and for, a lot of possibilities have opened up even just in the last month. Things you can imagine things getting better in a way that it was hard to imagine prior to the election.
Completely, man. I think I was looking at JD's X profile and realized a fifth of the people he follows were speakers at NatalCon 2023. That's mind blowing.
Yeah, he's clearly read in. He knows about this issue. He knows about what we're doing, and he also shares a concern of mine, he was pilloried for this when they were trying to frame him as weird and creepy. Mm-hmm. He was pilloried for his comment about the state being run by childless cat ladies. And, they're sort of trying to raise the hackles of suburban white women, many of whom are childless and own cats. I think the way that I would contextualize that is like, obviously, on the individual level, people make their own choices and like, it's whatever. But in the aggregate, when a whole society and a whole electorate and a whole like decision making body is dominated by people who do not have the experience of like strapping 6 car seats into a minivan, or dealing with fears about your kids walking to school or what they're going to encounter, or like people who don't have that context and that experience. Number one, to say nothing of like the biological changes that you undergo when you have kids, but just not having that experience and those worries, it's a radical political shift. As a matter of fact, it's the biggest political like effect size in American politics. Like there's all sorts of people whose political orientation on the if you sort of assess them on the basis of their immutable characteristics, there are bigger differences, distinctions. But if you assess them on the basis of something that like, I was this one way and then something happened to me and now my political orientation has changed, getting married and having kids is like number one, especially for women. And so it's like, on the one hand, there's this problem of people just sort of being out of touch with that experience. But then you also have to think about the political incentives, right? If a person will like almost certainly vote one way if they've had this experience, and they will almost certainly vote a different way if they haven't had that experience, and like you get votes if they haven't had that experience, like what kind of society are you incentivized to build?
Right. Right. And I think you see this in the urban crime discourse of framing right wingers as a bunch of scaredy cats.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
scared, and there's so much fear, man. When these are coming from people who don't have to protect little ones or
Yeah.
worry about them riding the bus, or who, what kind of schizophrenic axe wielding stranger is going to be roaming the streets when I'm out with my kids. Yeah, if I'm by myself, in my head, I feel like I could take on the axe wielding stranger, the kung fu
Or get
moves,
away or nowhere
or
to
get
be,
away.
or
Yeah,
yeah.
right, right. So yeah, it's kind of a straw man, obviously, that they're characterizing there, and it probably
Yeah.
comes from a lack of children that they're responsible for.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is this extent to which, especially as you get older without kids, you sort of lose touch with the experience of the world through their eyes. And then when you're a parent, that reawakens, and you go like, oh, all these grownups are like enormous and scary and could do anything. And so like it's like, are you scaredy cats about the subway? And it's like, well, yeah, because I'm like thinking and acting on behalf of a 9-year-old. Like,
Right,
yeah, it's a really scary situation. And like the idea that society, the whole everything, should be built without consideration for the fact that there are these sort of small, vulnerable, kind of stupid, in the sense of making, bad decisions or not having information. Like if you build a society that just does not accommodate that experience at all, then people will sort of rationally say like, maybe it's too much effort, maybe it's too much trouble for me to do that, because like you're sort of asking everyone. You hear this with like crying babies on the airplane. The tweet every couple of months, there's some tweet about a crying baby on the airplane, and whether or not the mom like bent over backwards to accommodate the experience of every other passenger on the aircraft. And it's like the, the idea that you would expect people to take 100% of the responsibility for the experience of raising a kid, which is like this, it's this massive investment that like, frankly, we used to like, people often will talk about like, oh, well, people used to have kids because they needed farm labor, right?
right.
It was all about the farm labor. And it's like, kids grew up faster back then, but like you're still talking about 3 decades, or no, sorry, 15 years of like not productive, not productive.
Right.
Another mouth, another thing to worry about, another thing that like breaks things and makes messes, and then you're talking about how long do they actually spend like working for you, which is like not it. That whole argument, and it's like I hear it from academics, I hear it from like otherwise intelligent
Yeah.
people, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like they live and they live their own life and they make their own money and they do their own things, and like that's not a modern invention. Like you don't have kids because it like pencils out economically. And then
Right.
when you're talking about having it pencil out economically while you're also like being asked to take full responsibility for their security and like creating a safe and wholesome environment, like that's all on you because it's nobody else's problem, because I should be able to have whatever adult experience I want in this space with no regard for that. And then simultaneously, it's like your kids, the kids you had, need to pay my retirement, and they need to cover my Medicare, and they need to fight in my wars. And it's like just totally unsustainable.
Completely. And in the modern context, I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I've been trying to train them how to follow up on project deliverables, close loops, circle back, and follow up. And it's difficult, man. So this whole idea of making them economically productive for my household, yeah, it's not true today, and I think your point is it was never that true.
No. I mean, like uh, on some minimal level, but like certainly not enough that like that's why you would do it. And the whole community was built around making that easier. Like the fact that you didn't have to constantly observe your kids because you knew the circumstances and the people they were going to be around, and the fact that you weren't having to take total responsibility for their education because like there were people in the community who you could trust, who you would sort of farm them out to. And and it's like because the society was built around kids, your individual life did not have to be totally built around your kids. Like, and here's what. So I
Yes.
did a little write up on this last week or this week, but like, what I think is so important about that is the trend that we're seeing is conservatives continuing to have kids, failing to have grandkids. Right? They inculcate their values, and they have a big brood that like that tends to vote conservative, tends to grow up and sort of reinstantiate the ideology they were raised with. And like, just from a if you think there's anything hereditary about being susceptible to like secular liberalism or whatever, the blob, the monoculture, whatever you want to call it, association with that is so profoundly sterilizing that you would think if there's anything heritable about that, if there's anything just like that you pass on to your kids that makes you susceptible to that, then it's just getting wiped, right? It's getting completely wiped out. I did a little study of my high school graduating class a year or two ago, maybe 3 years ago, which, I'm at the age where my sort of cohort's fertility, the women's at least, is radically tailing off and basically over. And the results of this, it was basically the Facebook group for my high school reunion, and it was looking at the ladies in the high school group, and I was sort of looking for marriage, kids, and it was about like half having no kids whatsoever, And that's roughly in line with what the data suggests from. So Stephen Shaw did his documentary Birth Gap, and he talks about unplanned childlessness. There are a couple other sources that suggest that millennials, my generation, are basically going to have 40% roughly are going to succeed, or are going to fail to reproduce. And I say fail because the evidence is overwhelmingly that most people want kids. This is not, people making an informed choice and saying, I'd prefer a life without kids. It's overwhelmingly people who wish they could and are not succeeding. So 40% no kids whatsoever. In my case, it was like 50. And then another 40% with 45% with 1 to 2, which is like not quite replacement. And then the next like 13, 15-ish percent had 45% of the kids because they had multiple kids. And the trend line, at least just from my sort of, and this is not scientific, I didn't have this peer reviewed. This was just me looking at things. The people who, number one, the max fertility cohort, the +3, +4 kid cohort, overwhelmingly religious, like overwhelmingly, and and loud about it on Facebook, for better or worse. And the 13%, 14%, 15% who had all the babies, they represent roughly half of the next generation. And the cohort, the childless cohort, was big enough that there's a lot you could say about them. There's a little more diverse, a little bit more going on, but like definitely more secular, definitely more temperamentally liberal, definitely more of like the experiences people. Like, I wanted to go to Mykonos, and I wanted to go to Dubai, and I wanted to go to Japan. And the people who did all that and like bought the t-shirt, no kids. Yeah. And so this selection pattern is clearly happening. And I actually like a lot of sort of conservative religious people will like celebrate that. They'll be like, "Oh man, I'm so glad that these libtards are just sort of opting out, breeding their way out of
Right.
of the system." But like, I remember, like when I was a kid, a lot of the sort of creative and cultural output of that type of person was pretty interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, there was a time, like for the Zoomers, you believe this or not, there was a time when liberals were like really funny, and they made great movies. And so I don't see that as an unalloyed good. Like I see that as a problem. And I would like to see a situation where some of those people like figure it out and make it through. But it's touch and go. It's going to be a close thing for like any of them.
Yeah. And it has been interesting now that this topic has entered more of the popular consciousness to see the left's kind of liberal takes on the problem and sort of their reaction to it. I've been kind of baffled by some of the objections or concern trolling about this topic coming from the left. I don't know if what you have seen, but I've seen a lot of fear about like forcing people who don't want to have kids to have kids, and I don't know what to make of that. I've never seen anyone on any side of this issue
Yeah.
advocate for anything approaching that. So I don't know who they're really arguing against. It's more sort of an imaginary straw man that they can tear down.
Yeah, and I think I'm close enough to most of the people saying stuff in this space that like I probably know the wackiest ones, right? Like probably it's possible that there's some wackier ones, but probably those people are not like in contact with the New York Times. Like so Like basically, I'm saying if there's wackier people, I don't know how the New York Times knows about them, and I don't.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, I've never heard anything even approaching that.
Yeah, I've never seen them quote someone. Oh, this person said
Right.
we're gonna, start forced
Yeah.
birth program.
The
I don't know.
factor. Well, okay. So I mean, Nick Fuentes, I guess, but
Well,
but like, but like
rage bait.
he's
Okay.
yeah yeah it's clearly pure trolling, and he's somebody who is sort of has no pull anywhere with anybody. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. There's rage bait, and that's it. And like even from like a practical perspective, if you set aside even the question of right and wrong, it's like 80% of the people who are not having kids wanted kids. It's actually 90%, but let's frame it up. So it's 10% who said, I actually have no interest in kids ever, and this is a choice. Then you have another 10% that it's a medical issue, and we're going to talk at the conference about some of the medical issue. But it's and endocrine disruptors, like those things are trending in the wrong direction. It's a problem. Medical infertility is growing, but it's not actually causing what we're concerned about. It's not actually going to lead to failure of like replacement fertility if people were just getting together and having kids, trying to have kids. The other 80% of people who don't have kids, it's, you know, I always wanted kids, but I was focusing on my education. I was focusing on my career. I didn't meet the right person. It was messy. It was complicated, and it didn't happen. And so on this subject of like the Handmaid's Tale, apart from being just sort of like a fantasy that like right wingers find like kind of funny and disturbing, the way to solve this problem is by helping people who already want kids to have kids. Like the number of people who don't want kids is like explicitly is so vanishingly small that like it why would you attack that first? Why would you go there? Why would you do any of that? It's about this 80% who want kids. And so, and one of the things I want to, so going back to the conference itself, the first conference was very much focused on like, let's just sort of circumscribe the problem. Let's look at the impact this is going to have. Like, what is it actually doing, this demographic problem? We talked about the effects on the economic system. We talked about the effects on the political system, on national defense. Like, because like the fact that the U.S. and China and Japan and South Korea are in this like race to see who can have the bottom fall out of their economy first is like super geopolitically important, and they're all headed that way. And demographics is a factor in each of those cases, but it's like extremely a factor in China, Japan, and Korea. So this next round of the conference, we want to talk about causality. And we've attracted a much deeper bench of academics, demographers, people who think and research and write about this stuff for a living. And we want to talk about what's actually going on. Like, why is this a problem? Because one of the critiques that I've heard in the last couple of months that I found pretty compelling, critiques of natalism as a program, is if people are saying, oh, I just don't feel like having kids, there's like something deep going on there. Like, I don't feel like having kids, or I'm not getting there. Like, it's like saying you don't feel like eating, you don't feel like breathing. You like, there's something's broken there. And what this commentator was arguing was that like a lot of pro-natal people have some political or ideological program that they're trying to instantiate. And they're saying, like, because of demographic collapse, because of this birth rate issue, what we really should do is instantiate my political or ideological program. And he was sort of like, but we haven't actually figured out what this is. We haven't actually figured out what's driving this. And if you want to say the problem with birth rates is we don't have enough conservative social policy. Like we let people take the pill and get abortions, and so that's why. Well, you got to explain Korea and Japan, which are like extraordinarily socially conservative on those like sexual vectors, specifically sexual vectors, and a number of other ways. And if you want to say that it's like, well, people can't afford it and there's not enough like healthcare support and childcare support, then it's like, well, what's going on in Norway and Iceland and Denmark? It's clearly not just that. That might be contributing, but it's not just that. And even like countries like that you wouldn't expect, that you would think would be like, if you're sort of viewing this from a naive modern perspective, you look at like Iran and you would go, well, surely Iran, this Islamic theocracy, surely they're having tons of kids, but they're not. And so it's like, what's going on? So purpose of this next conference will be to address those questions of causality. And we've invited people with lots of different takes. We tried to bring together a broader audience last round, and I think we succeeded, for where the issue was at then. But now it's a much broader, and people who are sort of aware of each other's thinking and kind of want to have the argument, want to have it out, which I think will be really valuable. Yeah. So that's sort of the. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, so one thing that surprised me about the conference last year is I was kind of expecting more people to come in with solutions. And what I found was a lot of people going, I don't know, because like the points you made about the social conservative sort of policies and norms being sort of falsified by looking at East Asia, and then the massive subsidized nanny state being falsified by Northern Europe. And so we all kind of like threw our hands up in the air. and I think what we're looking at for this next round of the conference is we have to dig into the why before we figure out how to solve this or address this problem, because no one's figured it out yet. The closest thing I've seen is More Births on Twitter has a great thread on some practical interventions that could boost fertility. But More Births is going to be a speaker at the conference, right?
Yeah. So we'll get his take. He's one of the best, and I don't know that he has like a credential on this. He's just a great researcher, and everybody I know who's aware of him really respects just the quality of the research that he does, and his intellectual honesty. Like he's definitely not agenda driven. He's very much just like, let's look at it. What does it say?
Yeah. That was one of the cool things that came out of the conference is, day one were our keynote speakers that were kind of on the agenda on the website. But day two, we opened it up to create an unconference where the attendees could bring their own topics and lead discussion groups. And so I think More Births led a breakout group, and it was a huge success. So I think we're repeating that this year, correct? So
yeah.
attendee who wants to bring a topic, you can create your own session on day two.
Yeah, one of the things that, it was something that we kind of knew as the conference was unfolding, but definitely in the feedback, it was like more unconference. That was so cool. I think a lot of conferences in general, people do get like speaker fatigue of just like listening to people talk. And I think, frankly, even like a lot of the speakers would just find it more enjoyable to have a looser format for networking conversation. So it's going to be Well, it's probably going to be a similar dose of speakers as last year because we've just got so many excellent speakers who've come. But we're also going to expand the unconference portion, and so that the time is broken up and there's more opportunity to engage with, because like the biggest the thing I heard from like everybody I talked to was like the people this issue has attracted, the people who've come to this conference, like everybody in this room is interesting. Everybody in this room has a thoughtful take on this, and it's people who might otherwise on all kinds of other issues disagree, but they were so like the conversation was taking place in such good faith that like, and it was cool because like you and I were having a conversation not long ago about really wishing that you could interrogate in a non-judgmental, non-ideological way the sort of opposing political perspective. And like, man, I wish this issue wasn't so hot, so I could just ask you questions in a way that didn't get people's hackles up, didn't make people freak out. We could just really understand each other. And that was kind of the magic of last year. It was really like that. And I think this round we're gonna replicate that, and we're also gonna have like a deeper body of research to pull from.
Yeah.
Go
Do you
ahead.
remember our speaker, Diana Fleischman's tweet at the conference? I think she gave us a ringing endorsement when she said, "This is what did she say? The lowest level of mental illness among attendees of any conference I've ever attended."
Any conference, yeah.
That is amazing.
I
We
sort
got
of
to put
believe
that on
that
the
though.
website. Yeah. But it reinforces your point of the quality of the attendees was amazing, and it was, I think that if I could pull out a trend from it, it was this blend of tech and trad that came
Mm-hmm.
together and had great collaborative discussions, and I think it kind of foreshadowed what we just saw in the recent election a bit,
Yeah.
of this coming together, of Silicon Valley sort of coming to its senses a bit and shifting away from this uniparty total dominance that they've been under for decades.
Yeah, and I think part of what has accomplished that is the scope of the problem is so immense that nobody's pat answers really cover it. And so if you're smart and you're honest, you go, I need to learn more. I need to understand this better. I need to ask more questions. I don't need to regurgitate answers, right? And I think that's like in our political moment, that definitely happened with people saying like it's time for dramatic change. And and on this issue, I think that it provides. I've said this before, but like there are very few issues where you have alignment that is both broad and deep, right? Like we can
Yeah.
have broad alignment on like the the baby harp seal, or you know even like sort of on the left climate change, on the right like crime in the abstract, like broad, like yeah, we should do something about this. And then you can have deep alignment, like if you're a traditional Catholic, or you're a Latter Day Saint, or you're you know you can have like, this is my handful of my tribe who really get it. But I think the issue of like, do I get to have grandkids, is incredibly broad and incredibly deep. And I think it selects for, well, like Diana Fleischman talking about the low mental illness thing. I think it sort of selects for people who have had to face life with a degree of like intellectual maturity. Because once you have kids, there's at least two things that happen. Number one, we've already talked about, which is like, I have to think about the ramifications of my ideology on like the life of a 9-year-old. That's one thing. But then there's also like, we can go on Twitter and play with ideas and like schizo post. But eventually I have to think about what I'm going to tell my little girl, what I'm going to tell my little boy about the world and how it really works. And it just makes you a lot more careful, I think. It makes you think deeply about what you actually believe, because if you're going to give your kids if you're going to teach your kids something crazy, something deeply countercultural, something you sort of that's going to get them in trouble, that's going to cause problems for them in their life, it had really better be true, right? You'd better really believe it. And so, yeah, I think it's a room full of people who have had to kind of battle test their ideas from that perspective, and think really, really carefully about them. I think that's just incredibly healthy. And I'm so excited to have them back in the same room. It's going to be a lot of
Oh
fun.
yeah, it's going to be so great in this round too. And there's so much momentum and so much to talk about that has happened since the last conference. So it's going to be really exciting, man. Can't wait.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that's changed, we touched on this earlier, the idea that, Trump's sort of inner circle, his cabinet, is populated by people who, like, number one, are sort of aware of the space that we operate in, and who also like care about this issue in particular. And it's like, if we have this research problem, we have this data problem, and it hasn't been well studied because it hasn't been understood as a priority by the organs that usually fund those kinds of things. But now it's like, yeah, it's like it should be, it seems like a state level policy priority. And some people are sort of afraid of that because they're like, it's going to be used to raise taxes, or to raise spending, or to be invasive into people's personal lives and all that. I just want to figure it out. Like, I want to go talk to people and get some real answers on why people are, and like, a big part of this issue is that it's such an intimate and profound decision that you make about like what your life will be about, that people are like probably not going to be honest with like a survey person.
Yeah. They'll tell you, oh,
And
it's too expensive. That's why.
right,
And
right.
it makes no sense. I think you brought this up in your recent writing of like there's something deeper going on here at a fundamental level. It's not just
Yeah.
about the expense.
No, because young Americans are richer than basically everyone who's ever had kids, like statistically. And that's not to say, and a lot of sort of conservative commentators will frame that up as like, well, we're just like sort of uniquely decadent, or lazy, or selfish, or whatever. And it's like, I wouldn't say that about the pandas. I wouldn't say that about the white rhino. I wouldn't say that about the Siberian tiger. Like, they just aren't made of the same stuff. Like, they're just, weak. Like this,
Decadent
these pandas
pandas.
don't know what it's like. That's so stupid to me. It's so stupid to me. And it's so counterproductive, because it's like, telling people that does not help. And so it's like, it's not that it's too, but so what the conservative commentators are right about is like, it's actually not too expensive. Like, you may sort of believe that, but what you're actually saying when you're saying it's too expensive is it's not worth it. Like, you could afford it, it's not worth it. And that's what I really want to interrogate. Like, why isn't it worth it? Like, and people spin a lot of poetry about having kids, you know, and you sort of have to, because it's really difficult to articulate transcendent experiences. Like, what else are you going to do? But there's also like so much like kvetching about how hard it is also. And nobody can really tell the truth, but it's like my sort of thesis now, which is loosely held, but I think it's worth investigating, is that people just don't find domestic life aspirational. And a lot of people have said, like, well, duh, like, of course, domestic life's not aspirational. It's never been aspirational. And what's happening now is that people now have the resources to escape domestic life. And so they're choosing that. And again, I would just challenge that, because like people have known where babies come from the whole time, basically the whole time. And there are lots of people who do not use hormonal birth control, do not, use condoms, or any of the like the technological solutions to this problem, who still know how to not have kids, and they don't sort of avoid the biological components of getting what they want sexually, right? I hope that I routed around that hard enough. Like, this is not
Yeah.
new, right?
No.
If people really are working with a different calculus of value, like go ahead.
The part I think may be new, and this is based on, I've had conversations with older generations about this topic, and the response I got is like, it wasn't something we thought about, or it made a decision about. It was just something everyone did. All my friends were having kids. It wasn't a decision in
Yeah.
their mind.
Yeah, it
Maybe
gets
that's the new
treated.
part.
It gets treated like this niche hobby that's like very expensive. Like,
Yeah.
and there's sort of, it's like running ultra marathons. Like, if you tell somebody that you run
Yeah.
ultra marathons, I got some family members that do this, and I remember how I responded to it. It's like, that sounds, I mean, it's impressive, but like, geez, like, why would you do that? And sort of, to be a real one, you kind of have to build your whole life around it. And
Yeah.
so it gets treated as this thing that like you just sort of called to, and not everyone is, like, many called, few chosen, to be ultra marathoners, or like the kind of people who like die in underwater caves. Like, it's this weird, risky, scary, expensive, time consuming thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that's part of it. But then you sort of have to go the next why, the one why deeper, right? I think Peter Thiel had the take, basically, that like people aren't having kids because people aren't having kids, right? Like, as which is this. It implies that fertility is this really fragile equilibrium, and like, once that equilibrium is broken, it's this feedback loop. And I think that there's an argument to be made. I think you could say that maybe that's part of the problem. But I don't think but then you got to think about like what actually pushed that thing off the cliff, right? Because something pushed it off the cliff. And it's been essentially going on in France since the French Revolution. So it's not birth control, it's not modern feminism, it's not TV, it's not automobiles, it's it's not women voting, it's none of those things. And I think I don't know enough about the French situation specifically, but when I look around at what's going on in our society, and like why people are saying it's not worth it, I do think it has something to do with, and maybe this is the relationship to the French Revolution and the Enlightenment. It's like operating within the confines of a totalizing state in which you are observed and constrained and just not sovereign. Like, people think of earlier forms of government, earlier ways of organizing society, as if they had like radically more power than they actually did. Just because the technology of observation wasn't there. Like, if you were a rural like peasant, they just couldn't afford to keep tabs on you. Like, you could do kind of what you wanted in a lot, like, and on the other hand, there was no one to stop like your sort of lord from making trouble for you if he had a mind to, because nobody was watching him either. So like there was these very like brute power dynamics at play all the way up the chain, from like, my relationship to my kids, to my relationship to my wife, to my relationship to, the landlord or the boss or whoever, like, because there were no like procedural checks on that system, people got away with a lot. But like, also, if you're like a decent person who wants to do good things and be good, like, you had a lot more latitude to do that, a lot more freedom. Like, it's sort of my sort of intuitive take, which I'd love to explore at the conference and run it by some of these academics and experts, because like you and I, we're not actual like professional anything in this domain, just people who care about this a lot and think about it a lot. But what I want to run by these people is like, to what extent is our current situation, to what extent can we analogize it to breeding in captivity? To what extent can we say like, well, if people don't feel like they're actually in control of their lives, and they don't actually possess the things that they're building, like, obviously they make less investment in those things. Like your children, if in sort of pre-modern, pre-enlightenment, like deeply pre-modern ways of human organization, the family being this sort of inviolable unit that was like an actual political unit, right? Like you were sort of sovereign within that sphere, that domain. The idea that you would then invest in that, like it's sort of, when you're thinking about your kids and their labor, you're not thinking about child labor. You're thinking about their whole life being part of your life and being integrated into this system that you own together. Like, the you know the king cares about the prince because the prince will one day be the king, and like, it's this thing that belongs to us, but that we also belong to. And I guess I'm getting like really abstract here, but like, I do think there's an element of, if maybe I can make it clearer by contrasting it with like, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to take a break from what I really want, which is consumption. I want to go on really cool vacations, and I want to eat good food, and I want to be comfortable, and I want to play a lot of video games. And I'm going to take a break from that in my 20s and 30s so I can raise some kids so that they can go on vacation and they can, enjoy life. There's very like there was that Yellowstone, or not Yellowstone's Landman, that new show out with Billy Bob Thornton hearing some grotesque sexual details from his daughter
Yes.
about her personal life. And there's this hicklib phenomenon, or this like, I'm a conservative but my kids are not really conservative phenomenon. And I don't think it's because the conservatives failed to inculcate their own values. I think it's that they're sort of the last stop. It's actually their values that have changed. And what they want for their kids is not what they had and not what they want for themselves. They sort of by circumstance, happenstance, were raised in this very conservative milieu where there was these expectations. But they're like, I just want my kids to be happy. And I want them to have abundant stuff and abundant experiences. And I want them to basically they're like vicarious liberals. Like, I'm not a liberal. I have these responsibilities and I have, I'm sort of bourgeois and responsible. But like, I want my daughter to just have whatever she wants all the time.
Is
Yeah.
it worse than captivity? Because like in captivity, I'm competing. There's a zookeeper, right? And eh, I could almost like be a chimpanzee who's gonna grow my army and we can take on the zookeeper. There's no zookeeper here. It's just this
Yeah.
blob that we're in. I mean, it's almost worse than the captivity
It's
analogy.
decentralized. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
headless.
Yeah.
It's headless. Yeah. I think that's definitely true. And so there's an incoherence to any, like, within that sort of naive liberal hedonic framework of like what life's about. And I said this, like, I think liberalism, basically the sort of naive harm avoidance, naive conflict avoidance. I want to have pleasurable and novel experiences a lot, and I want to have fights not very often, and I want to be in pain not very often, and I want to live a long time. That's sort of what you live for when there's nothing to live for. That's what's left when you're bereft of meaning. And so from that vantage, to say like well, I should, number one, I should really curtail my own consumption so that I can have these kids. Because like, whatever you might say about how kids are beautiful and precious and worth it, and the sort of sentimental rewards from having kids, it's not like direct hedonic consumption rewards. Like, it's not as fun as being single and having like more money in your 20s. And it's certainly not as safe. It's like, and like, we've talked about this, I think, before, but like the risks of, you sort of have either the risks of marriage, which are considerable, or you have the risks of raising a child with some other family arrangement, which those risks empirically are pretty dramatic. And so it's certainly not harm avoidant. It's certainly not risk avoidant. It only makes sense if there's like some deep meaning. And to say like, I think this is actually, I actually think when liberals say like, they have this line they love, and it's like they feel like they're saying something like real hard, which is like, my bloodline ends with me. Have you heard this?
Oh, yes, right,
My bloodline
right.
ends with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spiteful kind of motivations,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think what animates that is like this hedonic treadmill, this like circus, this I actually kind of get it for them.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, if that's what I thought it was all about, I'd be like, that's not worth it. I'm not doing that. And so, and I think that often gets construed on both ends of the argument as like, well, you must go to church. Like, you have to go to church and get some meaning into your life. And of course, that's part of it, right? Like some source of meaning, right? But I think if you're sort of trying to solve this problem on the object level, that's maybe what attracted some of the like tech crowd to this issue, was they were very accustomed to having it framed up in terms of like, I mean, some of the more controversial things is like, well, we got to save Christendom, or we got to save the white race, or we got to save like, you know, it, or we got to save our 401ks and our, you know, like
Social technologies is, I think, was a word that was used a lot from the tech side
social
at the natal
technologies.
natal con. You know, is like they 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 see these as instrumental meaning creator machines that
Right.
when you destroy those, you know, you end up with this massive problem.
Yeah, it's like the data became so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And the data points back to this really nebulous, complex question of meaning. And that's a really fun situation to be in my opinion. I mean, I like, you know, this is serious, of course, but like intellectually, it's fascinating to be in this place where the very systematic thinkers, the like people who are temperamentally just not interested in questions of meaning, don't enjoy thinking about them. Like a huge part of the AI millenarianism, the like, you know, AI will save us all, is predicated on this idea that so much of life is poetic and subjective and hard to get your, you know, hard to put numbers on, right? And there's a certain kind of person who's just infuriated by that, and they're like, but what if there was a technology that would allow us to put numbers on all that stuff? And like, I don't even have to, it could be a black box. I don't even have to understand the calculations, the computations. Just tell me that a computer looked at this and did math and then gave me like an answer. And it's this like tremendous weight lift. You can feel it when they talk about it. Like this tremendous weight lifted off their shoulders of like, oh, thank God, I don't have to think about questions of meaning. Everything could be data, everything could be math, and oh man, it's so great. And so like they're in a situation. I don't think they're going to escape it through AI, but that's sort of the excitement right now.
Yeah.
But the technology brothers are in this situation where, and sisters, where the math is failing them because it's this fundamentally spiritual question causing this problem. And then the trads are like, well, we got these meaning answers that clearly animate us, but like, what about our kids? And how do we not lose them? How do we not like? We clearly need to think about this more carefully and more rigorously than we have been thinking about it. And so there's this like marriage where you know you I fundamentally think that like those two ways of having your brain put together are supposed to align in like exactly this way.
Yeah.
I think that's, and even like, you know, someday, God willing, the liberals who are built to sort of rhapsodize and create art and chase experience and all of that, that we can reintegrate that, reincorporate that into something that's like healthy and harmonious. And so it's like there's like, I don't think these are political alignments. I think they're like deep psychological, maybe biological alignments. And
Yeah.
man, you gotta bring everybody in.
Yeah, and you know, I think this is the dialogue here between the tech and trad. I'm starting to see the connections and the light bulbs going off. I think the person who most exemplifies this is a guy Rudyard Lynch. What if alt hist? I don't know if you watch his
Yeah,
YouTube. He
yeah,
he's a young guy. He's like 23 years old. He came to the conference too, and he gave a presentation in the unconference session. He's incredibly knowledgeable, very thoughtful guy. And what he is starting to observe is that Christianity, Christian civilization, he characterizes it as like honoring humility, personal epistemological humility. And I think that is part of what animates the secular tech crowd. It right now they're stuck in this position where it animates them towards like atheism, agnosticism. But if they can begin to see that kind of intellectual, that questioning of Christianity is itself sort of like a Christian value and derived from Christianity, maybe there is a bridge to be built here that we could see coming out of this next conference. And I think Rudyard is like, he's going through that right now. He's kind of putting the pieces together.
There's a simultaneous. AI is such a fascinating technology. Because it's going to trend in two directions, I think. On the one hand, it's going to, if what you want is to encapsulate all reality under the sort of materialist umbrella and come up with materialist answers for everything, gather all the data so we can look at the data. You can do that with AI. But also, AI is going to absolutely shred like consensus building, because any form of evidence that anyone can present to you is falsifiable now. Everything has an asterisk next to it. And I don't think we've even come close to digesting the consequences of that. And for someone like me who's not a materialist, so I guess I'd put it this way. If you are a materialist, it's like horrifying. It's horrifying. Because, and I've heard them make this case, like we used to know where we were in the world. We used to have a grip on reality, and we could agree on it, and we could reach consensus. And now we're like back in the dark ages, and there could be sea monsters, and there could be abominable snowman. Like everything's wide open. And I think not to go too far afield, but even like some of the conspiratorial things that have emerged with the sort of deeper popularization of online discourse, whether it's like Epstein or UFOs or any of that stuff, it's really blown the lid off like all of the organs of like consensus knowledge, everything we thought we knew. And I guess my take on that, as someone who's not a materialist, is like, no, you were sort of always living in a world that was very like epistemologically contingent, and like everything you knew always kind of had an asterisk by it. You just had a big machine that could like feed everybody the same answer, and it's not that answer was right. It was just agreed upon. And so for me, the sort of re-enchantment of the world is like very exciting.
It's a Lindy phenomena.
Yeah, it's deeply Lindy.
Yeah. But no, this 20th century media total control of media and popular consciousness is very rare. It's maybe singular in human history. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. The idea that it's funny because we sort of, it's like a propaganda coup. It's an incredible propaganda coup where people have been encouraged to believe that like this is the most intellectually free society that's ever existed, when in fact like the organs of ideological control required to get this many people on the same page and thinking the same things, that would have been unthinkable in any prior period of human history. And Yeah, it's so we're all in the soup here. We're all shaken loose from our categories and having to ask a lot of questions. And what I find cool about it, living in this time, is that it's actually got to be my answers. It's got to be like I have to decide what I think about it. Nobody can tell me. And for many people that's frightening, but I think it's going to be really healthy. And so, to bring it back, like it's almost a metaphor for like what I think needs to happen with, and this goes back to like what a lot of people have asked me, why exit and natalism, like they see those as sort of really distinct projects. And for me, it's like natalism is natalism is the why, exit is the how. Like natalism is the problem, exit is what I've figured out to do about it, or what we're trying, right? Which is like, well, if our kids are growing up in an environment in which they have no sovereignty and they're monitored all the time and they're sort of dependent on systems that are opposed to family in general and particularly them in like and if we can carve out space, build something that's really ours so that it can be really theirs, so they can inherit something and so they can instantiate something with their own families that will be theirs, they'll own it, then maybe we get to have grandkids.
Yeah. And
And
that's what's
like, go
cool
ahead.
about the conference is there's multiple levels of problem and solution that we're trying to address. It's not just trying to turn the ship around at the level of hundreds of millions or billions of people.
Right.
It's how to solve for my family, how to solve for my local community.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to address this.
It's some people have framed it as like our climate change. It's this issue that sort of unites all the tribes. And
Broad and deep
yeah,
issue.
and people,
Yeah.
people care a lot about it, and it's this existential thing. It's also sort of, well, to be frank, it's sort of beyond the scope of direct political action. Like, if you care about climate change, there's really nothing that can be done about it unless you're like in the Chinese Communist Party. And even then it's like, well, what about India? And what about, like, there is no central body that has the ability to make policy on that issue. And similarly with global demographic decline, like, your country can get squared away, but like the planet is going to have demographic problems. Just that's baked in. That's already happening. And so, and I think people sort of, when they poo poo the conference, when they poo poo this issue, they say like, what's stupid to even worry about. That's what they're saying is like, you're talking about this global phenomenon. Like, what levers could you possibly pull to make a difference? And I would say, like, correct. So number one, like, yes, that's true. So then it becomes a question of like, what is the sphere at which we can be influential? Can we be influential at the scale of the nation? I think we can. Could we be influential at the scale of our larger tribe? I think for sure you could. And then, like, could you be influential at the scale of your family, your grandkids, the people you care about in your life? It's like, definitely, indisputably. And so that, I think, is that's going to be what I'm bringing to the conference. I mean, like, there's going to be people who have global solutions, who, like, whether it's like Project 2025 type stuff, or it's, you know, subsidies, tax credits, whatever. Like, you know, I don't mean to dismiss that. It's not my policy prescription, but like everything's on the table, right? Like, and you know, even like last year we tried inviting Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb guy. He
Population
didn't
bomb.
bite.
Yeah.
We wanted to have him come and tell us why it was actually stupid and population decline's great. And he didn't
Yeah.
he didn't bite. But I guess what I'm saying is like
Shoot.
that's the scope. That's who we want
Yeah.
at the conference. Well, I talked a little bit about how my perspective has changed in the last year. Are you coming to the conference with anything different this year?
I think there's a lot more potential for using levers of power to help families.
Yeah.
And that probably means doing less. It more not so much like enacting new programs and doing more. It probably means doing less at a governmental level and taking away some of the restrictions. You talk about like the car seat laws and how that's highly
Mm-hmm.
correlated with a massive decline in fertility.
Yeah.
There's simple things like these regulations that that get in the way, and I think there's now there is opportunity to actually bring some of these issues to the national level, and
Yeah.
there are coalitions of people who could actually use their voice is now, I think, on the table.
Yes.
It's not just exit, and
Yeah.
that's kind of new. That's just a couple of weeks ago became possible.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. To me, I think the product that I want to emerge from this conference, if I could pick one thing, it would be something we could offer to the various, you know, sources of funding and audience and sort of pull that are now available. All these levers of power. Something we could offer them to say like, "Hey, we're serious about understanding this question, and we've built a model, a hypothesis, a way to test it that could provide some real answers here." And what I like about this is it's going to be traditional academics with the rigor and the sort of investigative tools that they have at their disposal. And then it's also going to be people from the outside who have novel ways of looking at it and maybe can even sort of poke holes in some of the traditional elements of research design so that we can say like, let's look at this in a completely new way. And then, you know, potentially get people who care about that to fund it and get to some real answers. Like there's I said a couple of days ago, like the fact that social science is fake is totally political. Like you could have real social science if you were willing to like take certain questions seriously. Like the whole idea of comparing aggregate outcomes between groups is sort of illegal now. And so like of course that means social science is fake because that's what social science is. But if you could get the money and the talent together in a room to take those questions seriously and really explore them, you get to somewhere really interesting. So that's kind of
Yeah.
my hope to take away.
Yeah, and I mean, your Elon retweet, literally the richest man, maybe the most influential, powerful person on the planet, is paying attention to this conference, and so bring your projects, bring your
Yeah,
ideas, and I think you can use this conference as a vehicle to 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 expand and grow the projects that you bring.
100%, 100%. And you know, if it's not him, it's I mean, there's so many people who came to the last conference who were, you know, high income, involved in investing, you know, building things themselves, had audiences. Like it's going to be an incredibly sort of target rich environment if you're looking for people to partner with, if you're looking for, projects to be involved in yourself. Like, it's going to be really exciting. So anyway, yeah, you can get your tickets right now at natalism.org. And we're going to be doing a couple more of these episodes with some of the speakers, so you get to know them and the focus of their research. And then, yeah, we'll sort of be releasing more information. If you buy a ticket, you can get access to a opt-in directory of attendees, because like I say, these fascinating people involved in really interesting things, and you'll be able to get in touch with each other. We're going to have like a pre-event virtual meet and greet where we may actually invite some people who have takes on the conference but aren't able to attend in person, and have them sort of present to the group and answer some questions for ticket holders. And then several of the speakers have offered like their relevant book on the topic as a digital copy for conference attendees. So it's going to be a really interesting package of like, if this issue is of concern to you, it's kind of like an all-in-one, everything you need, all the books you need to read, all the people you need to talk to sort of get integrated and get involved. It's great to talk to you, man. Really excited to do this again. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great week.
Cheers.